Brian, thank you very much for being with us today. So to start with me, I'm Helen Attia, responsible for people and partnerships at Kadence. I'm sure most folks actually do know who you are, but why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey, Helen. Great to be here with you today. I'm Brian Elliott. I am a quote unquote future of work expert. We'll get into how much expertise I've got or don't have. Advisor to a number of both startups and larger enterprises on topics like flexibility, return to office, but also how to leverage tools and technology to make work better. So I jumped out of a job as a consultant in the late 1990s and hopped into tech. So Web 1.0 bubble, e-commerce retailer and SaaS companies and all the rest of it. It's been about 12 years as a startup CEO, building companies that did okay. Everything that we did reasonably well. Nothing died, nothing went spectacular. Joined Google in 2013-ish, where I ran a sizable chunk of Google Shopping, product management, engineering, operations, all the rest of it. And then went to Slack and worked on led the developer platform there for a number of years. And then in 2020, did something that was a little bit different. In 2020, as the pandemic was starting, I took a proposal to Stuart Butterfield, Slack's, a few other folks, and said, "Hey, we've always talked about having a think tank on the future of work. I'd like to grab some friends of mine and build one." So Future Forum was the thing that we built, backed by Slack, along with folks like Boston Consulting Group, Miller Knoll, and Management Leadership for Tomorrow. Spent 3 years doing some fantastic research and work with executives on a whole range of topics around the future of work. And that's what brings me here today. So how are we going to build flexibility into how our teams work in terms of both where they work and when they work, and how we're going to manage and lead distributed teams? Those are very important, very complex things that we need to solve. And the phrase hybrid work is just one piece of that overall.
One of the things that has been great working with you, Brian, is the help that you have given me personally and our team as we think about Kadence on Kadence and our own hybrid work, flexible work, distributed work plans and I wouldn't say policies in our case, but yeah, how we start to understand what's going to work for our own team. Just to share a little bit about that and to outline kind of how we work. So I would say we are kind of truly distributed. We have some folks who work more of a traditional hybrid model, a little bit in the office, a little bit from home, and also they use on-demand and co-working space. And then we have some folks who only work remote. We don't have anybody at the moment who is 5 days a week in the office. One of the biggest things that we have, I think, doubled down on is culture. I think most of us would have talked about our cultural values. Most of the organization understood them and could list them, but I'm not sure that they were as meaningful as they have become. And for me, that was a kind of big part of what I took away from some of our work together, that actually when some of that becomes meaningful, it can have a real impact on how we work.
Yeah, it's an interesting space because, yeah, for a long period of time, culture is what execs think of as like the slogans on the wall and the brief little snippets. It's also something that they tend to be worried about when it comes to remote or even hybrid work, right? Like what's happening to our culture. And so part of it is just even talking about it, figuring out what your culture is and listening to your employees. It'd be interesting, like what have those conversations been like for you internally at Kadence, and has anything shifted in terms of what you talk about now versus what you talked about before?
Yeah, I think, and this probably brings in the second point, which is for me the team level agreements. So one of the things that we didn't have really was any kind of common understanding in our teams as to how those teams wanted to work together. We had what I would consider a kind of broader understanding across the company as part of our culture as to how we would expect each other to kind of show up. But when I say doubling down, putting some of those things into a team level agreement, so some of those cultural values, taking them kind of a level down into something more meaningful and practical, is what we did really with the TLAs, with the team level agreements. And so it felt like we made a commitment at a team level to work in certain ways. And again, they're very different, the TLAs, based on the team that we're talking about. So the sales one is wildly different from the engineering one, actually. There are some things that we ask of everybody, again, from a kind of broad cultural perspective. But
Yeah.
for example, the engineering team want to see each other on a cadence that is very different to the sales team. It used to be very much about the content that we wanted to get across to the team when we were together. These are the things that we need to make sure we achieve on an offsite.
Yeah.
Whereas these days, the connection and the time together is everything. And
Yeah.
actually, that content can be fed through other team meetings, other company meetings remotely if we need to.
There's a common practice I've seen in a lot of organizations, which is your gatherings should be 50% social, 50% business, right? Like it is really important from relationship building. It's the those moments that matter the most. It's the meals together. It's the
Yeah.
social activities that you do that, help develop, deeper bonds. And informing people can be done in a variety of different ways, right? So I think you're spot on that one. From a team agreement perspective, I think part of what you're getting at too is the frequency that people get together is sort of the tip of the iceberg, right? It's one element of it, but what you're really doing is you're getting into how we work and how we drive outcomes together. How are we accountable to one another? And those types of conversations are a lot more valuable, especially if you are worried about things like productivity,
Yeah.
right? It's really getting the conversation going at the team level about making sure that we have shared commitments to one another about what outcomes are we trying to drive, what's our individual roles in making sure that that happens, and even discussions about things like how do we make decisions, how do we whether it's disagree and commit or
Yeah.
how we sort of drive towards as a team the things that we're responsible for delivering. Those are really productive conversations because then you can get into things like not just how often people are in the office, but clarifying, which tools we communicate through, what hours of the day are people expected to be available for meetings, but even things like, how do we make sure that we keep each other updated on, status on key projects as we go forward without people feeling like they're overwhelmed and in a whole mess of status meetings. So it's just a really rich area to mine if you're trying to drive performance in a team.
I think one of the biggest things I took from your book, How the Future Works, was that this is iterative. Like this is a living, breathing thing. It is going to change and keep changing and keep being improved upon. And I recognize that as you're talking there, we're probably still a little bit at the surface level. So there is another version of this that we can get into that would be deeper. I'm thinking about some of the things that came out recently in one of the team level agreements that was around how we commit to each other and kind of show up time-wise. So the team, this particular team was saying how we're very comfortable that people need to go pick up their kids or they need to have time slots for lunch blocked out. That kind of stuff is very important to us all culturally, I think, but particularly for this team. But then what they did want to see were times when they really could rely on each other to be available. And so just getting that down, that both of those two things can coexist was really meaningful for this team. And it sounds like a small thing, but they were really so wholeheartedly agreeing that that was important, both the freedom and the time when they could trust that each other was going to be available.
I think it's really great. One of my favorites on this that I've seen a lot of people gravitate towards is even things like what you're talking about, which is like, what are our core hours? Because if you can set hours that say, hey, look, everyone is expected 10 a.m. until 3 p.m. Monday through Thursday to be available for meetings, for quick, Slacks or chats or emails or whatever else. Knowing that helps you do things like, yeah, schedule the kid pickup or the doctor's appointment or whatever else outside of those hours and make sure that the team is all on a set of common expectations around it. The other one that's a favorite of mine is how do we communicate what consists of an urgent issue and how do we communicate it because one of the challenges I think all of us face is, we walk around with these devices that go off at all times of, morning, noon, and night. And if you have to monitor, Slack and Teams and PagerDuty and email and chat, all for something that's urgent from a work perspective, then it's pretty abusive almost. So one of the things I've seen people do is say, hey, look, these are the types of issues that get escalated off hours. And this is the method we're going to use if there's an issue. For my old team at Future Forum, it was text messages. That meant you didn't have to pay attention to Slack or email or anything else. But even knowing that helps people set boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Reduces burnout in an organization. And so as you're building these agreements, you can get into things like that. And then you can go even further on things like, how do we let people be their real selves at work while also setting boundaries? What's it mean for us to be, uh, um, working together as a group of humans too? So, and play around with tools like we used personal user manuals. I've used them since I was at Google. A personal user manual tells somebody more about me, right? It can get made fun of sometimes. It's like, well, is that your zodiac sign? No, but it is things like I'm a morning person, right? I happen to have, two older kids, not two younger kids at this point in time. So that's a little less of an issue than it was once upon a time from a work perspective. I tend to communicate in writing. Knowing things like that about your teammates can help you be more effective as a team, right? Because if I know, Helen, that you're an evening person and I'm a morning person, I know that I probably shouldn't schedule you for something, where I want to pick your brain at, 9 a.m. in the morning. I should probably wait and do it in the afternoon, as an example.
Great. Brian, thank you so much. Tons of nuggets in here that I'm sure our audience and customers are going to really appreciate. So thank you. Thanks for your time.
Helen, thank you. It's been great and love working with you.